right. So we recently had a meeting of our executive fellows, and brought our cohorts together. And we brought my brother Doug, who's one of my key mentors, into the conversation. We do a mid-session colloquium where we bring a certain speaker who's written certain things. And my brother Doug is as I said, a mentor of mine. He's quite a bit older than I am, and been around the block a bit. And so I got a chance to kind of be pulled through part of his wake. And one of the things that he had the opportunity to do was to do leadership development and build a program at Microsoft. From the moment, he told us this when he was with the fellows, he said, from the moment there were 400 employees, and he left Microsoft when they had 97,000 employees. So he had a chance to kind of watch through. Can you imagine just watching the change in an organization over that time? It's kind of mind-boggling to think about. But I think it was Reed, actually. Reed's here. And by the way, if you're a fellow, shout out to you. Maybe put your hand up. It's just, there's an awesome group of executive fellows in the WiLD program that are here today. But Reed asked him a question. I believe it was Reed. If it was somebody else, you're getting their thunder. But he said this. He said, if you were to ask an executive one question, what would you ask them? To get them to invite them into thinking about their leader development opportunity. And my brother said this. He said, I would ask them, what keeps you up at night? What keeps you up at night? And I think we were all sort of compelled or invited into that question. And I want to mention this before we go any further, is that the goal, I don't think, is to always sleep great at night. I think that's kind of an interesting thing, right? Is like, if we always slept great at night, then maybe we'd be missing something. Like, there's a possibility there might actually be something to pay attention to. I think sleeping at night is probably something more like the unemployment issue. It's like, we really don't want zero unemployment. We want this to kind of walk this edge in that. So, but I think we could maybe sleep better. But why is this question so important to ask a leader? Like, what was my brother getting at when Doug brought this up? What is it telling us about ourselves or about that leader? What is the issue that it's getting right to the heart of? What keeps you up at night? And I think it's this. As I've thought about this week, and by the way, if you have other things that you're thinking about related to this, please bring it to the conversation. But it's a whole question that calls out that we are human and we carry heavy burdens. And oftentimes those burdens are occurring at the intersection of our deepest concerns and our most pressing organizational challenges. I think sometimes when we think about these things at night related to that, I'm not saying sometimes it's just personal stuff, but so when it comes to leaders, like, what keeps us up? And here's some ideas that may capture your reality. Someone accuses you of something. Something happening with a person for whom you are responsible. Something you want, that job you want, that you may not feel like you have yet. That reality that you may not make payroll. And I thought more deeply, like, what is it that keeps us up at night about that? Is like that my people won't be resourced. We may work with so many organizations where the senior leadership team is thinking about that. How are we going to serve our customers this week? We deal with a lot of organizations who are dealing with a labor shortage. They're trying to figure out, how do we serve our customers this week? One that's a big for me is I'm speaking the next day and I feel underprepared. Or underqualified. So it's like that happens sometimes. One of my children, or your husband or your wife or someone close to you in a close relationship is suffering. You wake up tomorrow. I'm not trying to be all alarmist, but there's an announcement of war. You know what I mean? Like these possibilities, or simply body pain, changes with age, medication, like it all plays some kind of a role possibly. But it's obviously that different, and if you're, add yours to the list, but obviously different things keep us up at night. And we need to remember that we're different people. We all have an amazing and diverse story of experiences that we may be having. But what is the common factor for many of us? And I think that the common factor, when I think about that list, is it's this intersection of our development, and this is getting a little bit deeper, our psychology and our organizational or business need. But it's also something like this, something that we can't fix right now, something that feels outside of our control, feeling like we're the only ones dealing with it. We're feeling responsible. We might feel unprepared or underprepared for whatever it is that's happening in our lives. It's at that intersection so often of where our learning is, like, what am I understanding about myself and my capacity to actually fix this in the business need? And oftentimes it's what's out of control. So what is keeping us up at night is fundamentally, I'm gonna unpack this, an issue of what we call psychologically agency and sacrifice. It's fundamentally an issue of agency and sacrifice. And I might replace sacrifice in certain ways with letting go. And I don't mean letting go as if it's not important, but letting go possibly as a sacrifice, something that feels like I'm supposed to hold on to it and control it, and I can't. And so I hold on to it. And so I want to walk that line between agency and sacrifice. And this moment in this talk that we saw together is when I described the reality of leading. That feeling of that lack of preparation, that we might have done a better job. How could I be prepared for those kinds of moments? And what would be different if I were sleeping better? But here's the deal. This is a long, I want to invite you into the possibility that this is a long haul proposition too. Like if we were to, what would we change today that would actually affect us tomorrow? And I don't mean tomorrow, like tomorrow. I mean like a year from now, because this is a long haul investment. Because now imagine this, I want to invite you into the possibility that you might be able to help every person and leader around you sleep better at night. Like where would we begin? So I know it's a big question, but allow me to tell you where my brain went as I was preparing for this week and kind of spending my time reflecting on this. So I want to show you something that some of you have seen before, and this is a set of outcomes. And when you look at these words, I want you to think about like what would change in your organization if people were experiencing these things in increasing measure. And if you want, even think about how they might affect sleep, right? So people in your organization were feeling more supported, more confident, more creative, more hopeful, more patient. People were feeling more effective in increasing measure. They were feeling more open, more convicted, courageous, humble, intentional, purposeful, and productive. And I show you this because these are, I want you to think of these as outputs, as dependent variables for those of you that are, I think, like social psychologists. It's like, so these are things that we would hope would occur. We would want these things at the end of the day for people, these invisible kinds of things that we know are important. And I show you this because we did an impact study and on the effect of the WiLD toolkit. When you take people through a process of intentional over a year, of an intentional dive into what we know are some of the most important psychological principles and actions and intentions in a person. And so this is quite literally, those of you who experience this know what I'm talking about. It's like literally like use the tools, answer the questions, engage in a conversation. And this is where we saw meaningful effect size changes in human beings. And it kind of blew me away when I looked at this. I'm like, I'm not saying it's the only thing, but what we saw is that was having an impact. And I show you this because I want to tell you why I'm showing this, because I've got something up on my board here. So I did program evaluation. When I was in my PhD program, there was a lot of emphasis because at Claremont, there was a huge emphasis on program evaluation. And if you don't know, I bet you didn't know that's where we're going to go with this question today, by the way, but is that program evaluation is a huge industry. Because every time a government grant goes out or a big program is put in place in a corporation, they want to have someone sitting in the moment where they start to know whether or not the program worked or not, right? So we're going to put something together to do that. So I'm going to give you a very basic introduction to program evaluation. I'm going to bring this back to the issue of the heart that we're talking about, is that when you look at, and here's where this is awesome, y'all. We haven't done this for a while, so check out the blackboards. Okay, so I'm stepping up there, right, for just a moment. I get to go back, Charlene and I get to go back into my professorial moments, right? I don't get to do this every day. So with program evaluation, what you're taught to think about is that there are certain inputs. All right, give me a nod, everybody. I need this like visual amen that you can see what I'm talking about, okay? There's certain inputs. So think about this as the WiLD toolkit as a case study in point, all right? This is a case in point. So we put this process of tools in place in our organization, and that there are outputs. And those would be those dependent variables, those things that I put up on the screen that are things that we're changing in a person. Well, when you learn program evaluation, this is what blew me away, because I'm learning. I was involved in program evaluation. I was a part of this thing called through the California Wellness Foundation, where we were trying to look at wellness across small to mid-sized companies in the state of California. And so this blew me away, that so here's what we do. This is typically what we look at. Here's the program, here's what we put in place, and here's what we found. That's the easy part. The harder part, when it comes to things that are about the psychology of employees or people in the workforce, is understanding what is actually happening inside the brain of a person that's causing these outputs to exist. And in program evaluation, it's called the black box. So it's like, what's occurring in this space between the program and the outputs? What is happening inside of a person that's shifting their whole mindset of how they think about, what is it moving around? And that the thing that this is about is your theory of change. Like, what is actually happening? It's like, what are the variables that are inside this black box that bring about this change? And so what's also interesting is that typically programs are evaluated, or they fail because of one of two reasons: a failure of implementation or a failure in your theory of change. Okay, so let me give you one simple example. Let's say we want to reduce the stress of our employee workforce, and so we say, let's do a meditation program. We're going to teach people how to meditate. All right, and the theory of change would be what's actually happening in the person as they meditate that brings about the reduction in stress. Okay, that's the theory of change, that meditation actually does that. And it probably depends on what kind of meditation and all those things that are a part of that. But here's the deal. Organizations will blame the program for not working. It didn't work. Let's just say at the end of the day, we didn't see the change we wanted. And they'll blame it because they'll say, like, well, meditation didn't work, or at least it didn't work here. A failure of implementation could be, this is so bottom shelf, but it happens all the time. We failed to send out the invitation email. You know what I'm saying? So like, people didn't actually come, or they came late. It's so crazy. So sometimes they fail because of implementation. Sometimes they fail because of a theory of change. But what's interesting is this. So when you think about the WiLD toolkit as a process, it caused me to think about this more deeply. Is what is actually happening? What is the theory of change? And we talked about this quite a bit, but it's this. Let me just describe this. It's a whole approach to beginning to deepen our understanding of ourselves with a concrete conceptual model changes something. So that model I showed you, where someone's having conversations around their calling and purpose, someone's having conversations and answering questions about the people that surround them, about the experiences they've had, about their level of competence, about their blind spots, is as we have those kinds of conversations, it does this thing where it begins to get people thinking about those things, where they're all of a sudden in this space right here. As a result of these conversations, a person begins to shift their mindset. And over time, when a structure is put in place that's more than a retreat or an offsite, we call that leadership development, or we just give them their personality and call it a day. A person is beginning to think about, why am I here? What would I be willing to sacrifice? Not just the goals I'm setting, but why am I setting goals in these different areas of my life? How is my life, the rest of my life, playing a role in my work, and in my work playing a role in the rest of my life? Who is surrounding me? You begin to think about these kinds of questions, and it begins to, what we've seen is change a person. And what's fascinating is this: if I were to label that shift in a person that we also have seen, is that as a person goes through this structure of conversation, so they use the process themselves, but then they use it together, there is a fundamental shift in a person that goes back to what I described before, an increase in agency. In other words, my capacity and my belief and my efficacy, my belief that I could actually impact the outcomes, and an increase in my awareness of the things that I might sacrifice. Because it's not all about my agency, right? It's also this possibility that it's something I need to let go, or I need to actually, be willing to say, like, this is not mine to own, or something that I take ownership of. That fundamentally it shifts. And I go back to this, what's keeping us up at night is that if those things are about increasing our agency and our awareness of things to let go, that maybe we would sleep better. But here's one other thing I want to suggest to you. And this is what blew my mind, Beth, JR, DJ, Phil, okay? This is what kind of blew my mind. That the program evaluators never showed me that we've discovered is that there is a connection between implementation and theory of change that most people don't think about. In other words, they're not mutually exclusive. So, and I'll give you a brief example of this. We know that one of the critical factors to the WiLD toolkit, this set of questions that a person asks, has certain other variables in implementation that are necessary for it to work well. One of them we've talked to you all about. Senior leader participation is an implementation thing that we require. It kind of shocks you when you see Daniel Halleck for the first time with a CEO say, if you're not going to use this process for yourself, we won't work with you. It's a shocking thing because they've never heard someone talk to them that way, because we know it doesn't work as well. The other thing is this, an issue of implementation. Questions on their own don't tend to do that well. So if Lori and Dick Freed and Caitlin simply ask themselves a bunch of reflective questions, that we've discovered that the catalyst for change, that structure is necessary. So that, because it's hard, it's a lot of big questions, but that structure is necessary. But when you catalyze that into a conversation with a team that works together every day, suddenly that implementation part alongside the tools, that's what actually creates this unbelievable catalytic moment inside this space psychologically for a person that with this structure that builds that agency and the awareness of the things that they might let go. From something as simple as knowing how to that I would understand how to delegate something to Megan, because I realize I have competency in certain areas and not in others. And as Megan and I have a conversation where I discover, I'm like, oh, Megan does that all day long. But it increases something for a team that's just unbelievable to see. And so I step back from this for just a moment and I say, there are so many things I could tell you about the way that we have structured implementation. Like for a lot of our programs, we have very rigorous applications because we know that someone coming developmentally ready is really key for WiLD programs. But we also know this, that rigorous application where they're asked hard questions they've never been asked before, that the program has begun the moment they ask themselves a question in the application. Do you hear me what I'm saying? It would have been looked at as an implementation thing, but it's actually a part of the theory of change. Those things are working together. And so I know, Eva, this is lighting up your brain in all kinds of ways. I know that right now because I know you well. So as you think about this, and I know there's many, I just want to tell you 3 things that I hope you might have heard as you get into these conversations. You can go anywhere you want. Like I was going to tell you at the beginning, we're going off-road today. So put on your 35-inch tires or whatever you got on your car. We're going there. So here are 3 things. The one thing is this. Maybe it's the importance of agency and letting go as that long-term investment that might help us sleep better and help our people sleep better over the long haul. That secret sauce, might be that the implementation or that contracting and the theoretical framework and system driving learning and change are interacting. For some of you, that might be something you're like, I'm going to say more about that because this is where we crowdsource wisdom. You get smarter, we're smarter together. And then the third thing is that it will take time and an investment in people that must start now. It must start now, and culture change impacted tomorrow has to start today. We can complain all day about what we don't have and the leaders we have all day long. But if we don't start today, we can complain about presidential candidates or whatever else. But what if we're a part of setting a foundation now? So 20 years from now, we're not asking that question as much. So those are 3 possible ways we could go.